Hello, and thanks for tuning in to hear our conversation today with David Moyes, former Preston, Everton and Man United manager, who's currently in charge at West Ham United. My name is Eric McAleer and I'm the General Manager of WorldStrides Sports Division. Our Starting 11 speaker series is based around conversations with some of the top minds in world of football with specific interest around leadership, culture and their coaching journey. I'm excited to welcome David to share some of his experience, insights and reflections with our global community. I'm going to go a little bit off script here, David, with your introduction because I know it super well. Growing up in Stockymere Avenue in Glasgow and the Bearsden area of Glasgow, spent your formative years with Glasgow Celtic, moving through the journey as a player, moving down to Cambridge. I distinctly remember when you moved to Cambridge, it was your first move to England, and then working your way through the leagues of England, certainly a fantastic playing career. Then going on to Preston North End, firstly as a player assistant coach and working your way through the journey, and then very quickly taking over the job at Everton. I've known David for 36 years since his father, David Senior, was my own coach growing up in the Drumchapel Amateurs Football Club in the mid-80s. And David and I actually first met in 1985. David, this was back in Sheffield Stadium, the old home at Clyde. And I distinctly remember it was a 2-2 game. We were playing against Clyde and 2-0 down at half-time, and you were helping your dad with the game this particular night. 2-0 down. Ian Ferguson was playing up front for Clyde. And we came in at half-time and you gave your brother Kenny and I a bit of a roasting at half-time, and we came back and we drew the game 2 each. And it was yesterday.
Well, I'm glad you remember that. You've got a better memory than me, Eric, that's for sure. But I would have definitely given Kenny a roasting, that's for sure.
Oh, I tell you, I remember it like yesterday, David. And you went into the changing room at the old Sheffield changing rooms, and Ian Ferguson was running as ragged, and I was playing next to Kenny, and he just tore us a new one. And we came out like a bat out of hell in the second half and came back and threw the game 2 each. But that was the first time I'd met you, and certainly, you know, I've been on a journey with you and been very closely watching your fantastic journey through the years. And you know, congratulations to you on it. But just to start there, David, obviously thinking back to your early years and you know, just as we were talking about before we started recording, your early years at Bearsden Academy, that was a great group. That was a great grounding for you, and for you to come through there as a leader, as a young player, I'm sure was great.
Yeah, we were fortunate at that time. We had 3 or 4 very good players. Now, by this time, when I'd started sort of high school at 12, 13, the school team was really important. And it was simple things that there was trials going on at the school. You had to get in the school team through the trials, and you know, there'd be 30 or 40 boys trying to have trials, and the PE teachers were then picking the team. So even that at that time was a big thing to get in your school team. Yeah. But from there, you know, we realised that we had 4 or 5 really good players, or players with chances of being good players. And we went along over the 2-3 years at Bearsden. We got better and eventually became a team that started to win a few trophies, and we're always round the sort of the finals of what we would call it, the Scottish Cup in Scotland and Scottish Schools Cup and Glasgow trophies where we were. So, and it wasn't normal for Bearsden because Bearsden was a bit of an affluent area.
Yeah.
And obviously, many times the best teams had come from some of the rougher areas of Glasgow, you know, from Chapel, from, you know, Easterhouse, from the Gorbals area, you know, Castlemilk. So for Bearsden to have a team was not quite as normal, and we were sort of the first ones really at that time at Bearsden to start getting in front and win a few trophies then.
And I remember some of those players, David, you know, the Neil Watts and Neil Semples and Neil Jeffries and Michael. You know, you had a good core of players that went on to do well from as you say, from the Bearsden area.
Yeah, there was a lot of those boys at the time, you know, all went on and had early careers, had been signed up. You know, there was 3 of us signed for Glasgow Celtic. There was one, I think, at Partick Thistle. There was one at Rangers. So we had a group of boys who were always getting opportunities or a chance to see if they wanted to further their career. Yeah. At that time, as you know, it was called S forms. We were signed as schoolboy forms in Scotland. So it meant that we were affiliated to the club. Yeah. So to have 3 or 4 S form signings in your school team was, I wouldn't say it was unusual, because Glasgow had so many good young players around that period. So many young players with potential and a chance. And Certainly, I think much more than there is now. But at that time in Glasgow, there was a bundle of young players. Yeah.
And you think of you coming through as a young centre half, and you know, you think of the quality of players in the Glasgow area. I'm sure you were coming up against some top players, even as a 14, 15, 16-year-old coming through.
Yeah. Well, probably the biggest one I remember is Maurice Johnston was at St Roch's. And we had to play, I think we had to play St Roch's in the quarterfinals or the semi-finals of the Glasgow Cup or some cup. And, you know, and I was, because I knew him, Kenny McDowell was another one. Kenny McDowell was playing for one of the schools in Drumchapel, and we'd be up against each other quite regular. So in Mulgai, you know, they had one or two good players at Mulgai as well, which was nearby. So, you know, they had a boy called David Kenny who went on to play for Celtic, was at Celtic as a youth player as well. So every game you would be coming up against boys who you knew were signed for other clubs and were probably going to be boys who would be your opposition for the next 3-4 years. That was the way it was going to be.
And how do you compare that, David? You know, now when you reflect back where you are today of the system nowadays, you know, you look at the pro youth and the academy system, and you know what you came through when you used to go play for the school on a Saturday morning, Celtic Boys Club on a Saturday afternoon, and you know, you probably go help your dad with the college team over the weekend as well. As you know, how do you compare that to now for you, Brandy?
Well, I think there was a period we went through football where we thought that the players were playing too much, you know, and there was a lot of story about shin splints and all things. So they started to try and cut out football, and I actually think if anything, it's made it worse. I think playing for your school team is really important. I think playing for your own boys' team is really important, if that's on. But because of now the professionalism from such a young age, as you'll know from over there as well, you know, the boys at 8 and 9 are coming in, and girls, and you know. And now you're really affiliated to the club. So you're nearly playing for your club more than you are for your boys' team.
Yeah.
And I actually think that if it's something which, if I could do anything about it, I'd probably say, look, it's a bit young to join the clubs. But what I will say about the club's coaching and their training, their facilities, you get to play with a really high level and train with a high level of player. I've got to say all those things would make you say, well, they're doing it right.
Yeah.
But I think, for example, from our experience in Scotland at the moment, we're not doing it right. We're not getting enough results with the young players.
Yeah.
And maybe the way we're doing it now is not suiting, and maybe the way in the past did suit us better.
Yeah.
But I do hope that we can find the right solution. It's not an easy one, because I think the level of professionalism the young players get in is a good thing. But to start at a football club at 8 or 9 years old, the journey to get to 16 to find out if you're going to even be good enough is so long. Never mind the journey when you become a 16-year-old to try and get to your 21 to see if you're going to be a pro. So it's a long way now for the young players to become professionals.
Yeah. Now, just to think back on those days, David, I know your father, David Senior, was certainly, and still is one of the most favourite people I've ever met in the football journey. How was, your relationship with your dad, and what kind of influence was he on you as you were going through your early years, David, as a young player? And, so how was that relationship even up until today?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the biggest thing is, my dad was a massive influence on me.
Yeah.
But it wasn't in a way that he was telling me what I was doing right, what I was doing wrong. It wasn't that sort. It was his influence of how he led, how he, handled things, his organisation, his leadership. I think doing all the right things, the correct habits as much as you could. Yeah. His love of football was incredible. And his sort of big thing was that, the effort and the time he put into young boys, young players all the time. So I think that was the big thing that I picked up more from my dad. When I was a player, he was always encouraging. He always watched me when he could. He always came to see how I got on. And I think quietly, he never turned around and would ever say to me, you were terrible today. And just in the same breath, he'd never turn around and say, you were great today. Yeah. I think it was always encouragement and the knowledge that he was there. And I think he probably in his own way knew that I was on a journey, and let's see how it goes without. And I think it's the case with parents. You've got to watch that you're not too pushy. Yeah. But on the same breath, you've got to make sure that you are involved. And I think that he got the balance right at that time.
And if anybody was to ask me, about David, when I played for your dad for 4 years as a young player, and same to your point, David, is his passion for the game and love for the game. And I spoke to him not too long ago as well. It's still the same.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he instilled, because I know you fairly well, and you know, and your downtime and your passion is watching football.
Yeah, I think that you've got to have a real drive and a love for it. And I don't think you have any longevity if you don't.
Yeah.
And my dad, you know, even in where he is, would still like to be out watching young players play and scouting for teams and doing what he can. And he's lived with me for a long time down in England and would be at every game, you know, every Everton game, every Man United game, every Preston game. He would always be trying to be watching the games and supporting.
So let's jump on a little bit, David. I remember your early days going into Celtic, and what a fantastic opportunity that was for you when you think back to the players. And you know, just in your early years as a young player at Celtic, who were your major influences as you started to come through, David?
Well, it was a great club which had great principles and everything about it. It was a joy. It really was, because Celtic were a club that won things and were consistently winners and had been winning European Cups not too long prior to it. So to come into that environment gave you the real feeling of winners. I mean, but the real ones at the time were the likes of Danny McGrain. You looked up to Danny McGrain, and I always have done, and probably the best player I've ever played with, Danny. You know, Scottish international. But people like Tommy Burns was slightly younger than Danny, and was a little bit more, you know, more aggressive with you. Danny would have sort of spoke to you nicely, but Tommy was more aggressive. But we had a bundle of Scottish international players, all top drawer players. You know, from Roy Aitken to Charlie Nicholas to David Provan to Murdo MacLeod, wherever you just had lots and lots of good people to look at. And I always think that the start of my career was probably the reason where I am, because of the upbringing. You know, what winning looked like, what the top players looked like as well. So I was really fortunate with that. And also at the time I was the manager, Billy McNeil, was very good to me and gave me a good opportunity, and someone who I really respected.
Yeah. And even, you know, as a very young, you were still in your late teens, and I distinctly remember you getting into what is now the Champions League team and the Champions League squad. And one I think that sticks out in my mind is you played, I think it was away at Ajax.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did. Well, I played at home against Ajax and we drew 2 each. Yeah. And we went over there, and I came on as a sub with Charlie Nicholas that night, and or George McCluskey, one of the, George scored. I think I came on with Charlie as a sub, the two of us together, but George scored and we won in Holland, and Johan Cruyff, and they had Jan Molby. They had, and actually, I've got a great story that night, Eric. In those days in the Champions League or the European Cup, then all the players had to wear 1 to 11, unlike nowadays where you have squad numbers. So after the game, we were swapping shirts, and the shirts at that time were sort of just thrown in and out the dressing room the way it was. Yeah. Well, I get thrown number 14 shirt, and as you know, Johan Cruyff's number was number 14. So I actually, you know, when I got it, I was thrilled, but obviously it was actually whoever was sub on the night's jersey. And but I used to always say I've got number 14, it's Johan Cruyff, even though I knew it was sub. But I went on, it was only when somebody sent me the programme from the game. The person who wore number 14 that night for Ajax was Van Basten. So Van Basten was a sub for Ajax that night, and I ended up with Van Basten's jersey number 14, which I have framed down the stairs actually. So so it's one of the really good memories actually, to be honest.
But you just think about that group, and the players that you just named there, David. You know, for example, the Roy Aitkens of the world and the Tommy Burns, and you know that's just an absolute priceless upbringing for a teenager. You know, just the habits and the life skills and the environment that you'd have been in every single day, as you said, would have helped you to where you are today. Yeah, they were great, because every day they demanded. It was high standards. You know, winning at Celtic was nearly. I was going to say it was at all costs. It was at the end. You know, you had to win at Celtic, but ultimately they wanted you to play good football. They wanted you to play attacking football. If you won 1-0, they wondered why you hadn't won 3-0. You know. Yeah. When you won 5-0, they were saying, "Oh well, I expected you to win." There was just every time you won, it was expected. The minute there was a defeat, if the youth team lost, or the reserves lost, or the first team lost, there was always someone getting it at the club, you know, because the standards were so high. They really were, and they're the memories I take from it. That the winning part of it was really important.
The style you done it in was important,
Yeah.
but ultimately the winning was the thing which really mattered to them more than anything.
And I think, you know, one of the pieces from there, and this has been fascinating to watch, is as a name that jumps to mind is Jimmy Lumsden. David, you know, I know that Jimmy's been on your majority of your long journey with you, and I think he was your reserve coach then at Celtic, and you know, describe that relationship and how that came about and what he's been for you, David.
Mm-hmm. Well, he was a youth team manager at the time. If you remember Frank Connor, who was a real character and probably toughened us all up, a little bit of old school really, but Jimmy was great for me. Jimmy came from Clydebank as a player at Celtic, and he always claims that he was Billy McNeil's first signing, which I think he probably was.
Yeah.
And he was actually a really talented footballer, Jimmy, as well. I don't tell him that, but he was.
I was a season ticket holder at Clydebank, Davey, and he was on the Davy Cooper team.
He was, that's it. And he talks a lot.
What a team they were. And Jimmy was great. Jimmy was
great. And he, so as we went our own ways, you know, when I was sort of 21 and I went away and Jimmy done his thing, he was away working in England as well. When I got the job at Preston, I decided that I wanted to bring Jimmy with me. So Jimmy became one of my sort of confidants. He was a coach as well with me and very good. But Jimmy will tell you, you know, Jimmy was probably joining me about 15. I was making him run with the boys, and he'll tell you, he says, oh, he was making me run everywhere. He tells the stories. Yeah. But since then, I've had Jimmy everywhere. The most important thing is loyalty, is honesty. We'd never let people say a bad word, which, if you're going to stay in football, you need people who are going to stick up for you and not only help you and advise you, but Jimmy's played a big part on a lot of the signings at Everton. Yeah. He's got a really good eye for a player, but someone who I personally really enjoyed. And I think having somebody a little bit older around you, and I'm going to say a little bit wiser, is certainly a good thing for a young coach. Yeah, I think so. And just we had James McFadden on the other day, and we had a great conversation with James McFadden, and you know there was a couple of pieces that jumped out to me in our chat with James McFadden. First of all, you know, I remember you making a description which was right on the money of James McFadden being a gallant young Glasgow boy, you know, when he arrived at Everton, when you signed him, and you know, and he then countered that, you know, he had fantastic complimentary things to say about you and how you get the best out of him. But one of his quotes was that he felt you were a control freak, but in an unbelievably nice way, and in a very complimentary way with regards to organisation and standards and expectations and accountability, and just spoke very, very highly of that. You know, how does that sound to you, David? That sounds spot on, because but I think there's also, I think if I looked at myself now till then, it's different. But at that time, when you're making your way in the game, trying to be a manager or a coach, you know, you have to influence it. You have to be the one who's showing. You have to set the standards. You're looking to make sure that everybody realises the levels you want. So I always thought that hard working, committed, you know, showing the players exactly what we wanted. I didn't have any downtime with the players, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And I was tough. Yeah. But I always said, you know, I loved them all because they were all really important to me. Yeah. But, you know, I wasn't someone who was openly praiseworthy all the time, because I was always trying to get more out of them, always asking for more, always pushing for more. Yeah. And I think that's why we got the success. And James McFadden, I mean, the group of players James McFadden was around and with, we had an incredible group of players, you know, from, I could go on, there's just so many, you know, of top players, from Tim Howard, who we mentioned, to Tim Cahill, to Mikel Arteta, to Stephen Pienaar, to, you know, there's loads and loads we could go on, how many we had. So the journey I had at Everton was lots of players at that time. But I think that my control freak title, I think, would probably be correct at that time. I would like to think that with age and sort of mellowing a little bit, it's probably gone away, but maybe some would say it hasn't. I love the part you said there is about hard work. You know, I've been in to visit you a couple of times at Finch Farm and at Carrington and a few places, and one of the things I loved is you still perceive yourself, you know, you're the head coach, and you like to be hands-on. You're setting the tempo, you're setting the tone. You know, I remember that particular day I came in to see you at Finch Farm, and just the tempo of the session was just phenomenal.
but you were in the middle, you were driving the energy, and you were setting the tone. And is that still the same today, David?
I'll tell you why it's still the same today is because I've just taken over a new club at West Ham only a couple of months ago prior to we're not in the best position. So I feel that at this time, it's the coach's voice the players need to hear. They need to see what I want. They need to see the level, the expectations, what I want them to set and how I want them to play. So, but I hope, I think in future I'm looking to give more. I've got some really good coaches, some people who can do it.
Yeah.
But I think at the moment while you're there, the players want to hear the manager. They need his input. So I wouldn't say I'm on it all the time, but I do think that I think the coach's responsibility is to show exactly what they want. Yeah. I think once you're a bit more settled into the job and ready, then you can start to sort of give other people, other members of staff the jobs and the bits you want. And I have some very good staff who are more than capable.
Yeah, yeah. And just leading on from that, can you give us an insight to some of the best leaders that you've came across in your journey, David, is through your playing days and moving into your coaching and managing days, whether that's, playing for or a captain on your teams, or, who's kind of stands out from the rest through your journey?
Well, if I started back in the early days, obviously the best leader was Billy McNeil because he was a manager. He had lifted the European Cup for Celtic. He had an aura about him. He was Big Billy. He had that presence about him because if you lift the European Cup and you've done that with Celtic, you have got all that. Yeah. So he had that as a manager. So he didn't need to do anything else because his professional career gave him that, I felt. Yeah. But since then, I've come round some others, and around that time I was at the Scottish youth team, played under Andy Roxburgh. Yeah. Andy Roxburgh was one of the new young modern coaches coming out of Scotland, and slightly different and more coach aware and looking at more things. So I actually saw Andy as a leader in a different way. Andy was a leader because he was innovative, if I got the word right there, and he was trying to find other ways from maybe the way we were in Scotland. The coaching courses in Scotland were excellent, and we're trying to develop them, and they've gone on to become some of the best coaching courses I think anywhere. And I have to say a lot of that came from Andy Roxburgh's leadership and the way he went. But I've had other managers, I've had so many managers, and they've all been good leaders in different ways. There's been a lot of things I wouldn't do. Yeah. There's been lots of things I have done which I've seen from them. But for example, Terry Cooper, as you know, was a great Leeds United player. He was my manager at Bristol City. Yeah. And he was a different leader. The players, we loved him. We loved the way he went about the players, and we loved the way he dealt with us. He had a laid-back attitude. Yeah. And we had a really good team at Bristol City of players, and got to a couple of cup finals with Bristol City. So there's a lot of different ways to lead. There isn't any one way to lead. There isn't any one right way to lead. Yeah. But I think it's the way which suits the individual and the personnel himself. Yeah. So I've been fortunate to come across 2 or 3 very, very good ones.
And what about club captains that you've had under your tenure at the various places? Is there any that stands out as being?
Oh, there's a few. When I was thinking about this earlier, I was thinking to myself as Roy Aitken was a real leader. Yeah. Yeah. Roy Aitken was a real leader amongst the players as well. Danny McGrain.
The style of player, David. The style of play that he was.
Style of play. Yeah. Style of play gave you that. You followed him because he was big, he was fast, he was powerful. He could take the ball. Whereas Danny McGrain was pure poetry, if you want to say. Hard as nails, great professional. Yeah. So lots and lots of things, but over the journey, I've seen lots of really good things. But I think near where I've been just now, Phil Neville came to Everton from Manchester United, and he was a brilliant captain. Yeah. He was the responsibility he took for the players, he took on himself. He would always take the ball. Yeah. He'd never sort of put himself in front of anybody else. Yeah. So he was an amazing captain, Phil Neville. And to be fair, Phil Jagielka followed on from him and picked up a lot of the traits of Phil Neville. But when I went to Manchester United, I got a chance to see what it really looks like, what the best players look like, what the real winners look like. And Nemanja Vidic was an incredible leader. Yeah. Incredible, strong, tough character. Patrice Evra was an incredible character. And probably, you know, there was so many around Manchester United who were really good leaders, but you can see why they were successful because of the type of captains they had, the type of men they had, and they had some unbelievably good players and good leaders.
Yeah. And I do remember, obviously, the Sir Alex question. I do remember, David, when you were a young manager, you were interviewed and you contemplated taking the number 2 job.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was in your earlier years, maybe just.
I was at Preston, and it was the year Manchester United won the Champions League. I think it might be '98. I might be wrong, so it's around that time anyway. Yeah. And it was between me and Steve McLaren, and Steve McLaren got the job with Sir Alex. But I was manager of Preston at the time, and hey, would I have said no? Of course I wouldn't have. But he did ask me, and we did have a conversation about me becoming number 2 at that time.
Yeah. And just, you know, leading on from that, as you know, talking about the leadership, spinning a little further forward, when you think back to some of the teams, what were some of the best cultures that you were within? You know, maybe teams that maybe punched above their weight, you know, whether you were a player, you know, or whether you were an early manager. Even speaking about Preston before we come on, you know, is you had fantastic early success with that Preston squad.
Yeah. Well, it's strange. It might not be somebody who people who know football would talk so much, but when I took over at Preston, John Beck had been the manager. I signed for John Beck, who had an outrageous, we sort of mentioned him earlier. I was going to say outrageous style, but it wasn't. But it was a winning type of football, which he found was right.
Yeah. He
was a very, very good coach, but in the way he wanted it done.
Yeah.
And then Gary Peters took over from him, who was his assistant. And then I was Gary's assistant and I took over. So what there was at Preston was stability.
Yeah.
And what it was actually doing was building the culture.
Yeah.
And what I would say is the players were incredibly fit under John Beck and under Gary, and I hope under me. So it sort of went down through. I hope by the time I had got them nearly to the Premier League, we had altered their style. But ultimately there was it had a time to form. And the chairman and the board, they were really clever people, you know, weren't chopping and changing, weren't bringing different people in, allowed that little bit of culture to flow down. And in the end, I think they got it with John. John done a good job, and so did Gary. But I think when they got to my stage, we were only 1 game away from getting to the Premier League.
Yeah.
And the journey we were on was a great one. So that culture was a great culture, and it started. But quite often, if you're trying to build culture, it's going to take you time. You know, if there's owners of football club, you're not going to build a culture in 6 months, 1 year. Yeah. You can start to put the sort of the building work down, the groundwork down, I should say. But to actually have it in the way you want, it takes years for it to happen.
And I think in your early years at Everton, David, I'm sure that was probably one of your proudest achievements when you had a club that certainly didn't have the largest budget, but you had inbuilt a culture that you were consistently in the top 8 in the top league in the world.
Mm-hmm. No, that's right, and that was great for us. I mean, now it took us 11 years, but not to get to the point where we were. I always felt we were so good. We were always threatening the top of the league at Everton. We got so many good players, and many of them we brought from the lower leagues, but it took them time. But I was very fortunate when I first took over at Everton. I had people like Davy Weir and Alan Stubbs, for example. You know, so what happened is when the next group of players came in, whether it had been Jolien Lescott, Phil Jagielka, whoever it may be, it was getting passed on down the line because they were all getting passed on the levels and how it should be. So we built a really good culture at Everton. A hard-working, committed, but also, you know, getting the best out of each other all the time. But a really good team as well, full of really talented individual footballers, and nearly all of them international players. Yeah,
and certainly a massive achievement. And just to finish up here, David, what I would say is probably, you know, what would you say have been your key traits to success for your longevity at the top in the English Premier League as you look back and reflect and you look at your journey? You know, why and how have you stayed at the top for so long?
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it, and I think that, and it's an easy thing to say, but I do, and I don't love it all the time because when you're losing, you don't love it, and there'll be weeks of that you think, oh, this isn't going well, and I'm not so comfortable. But I think it's if you're talking about the longevity, I think you you need to really be immersed in the game. You want to be watching it. You want to be trying to improve on it. I became a coach very young. I now have to keep myself up to date even more now, because there's lots of changes in football. You know, we're taking the ball in a different way. We're playing in a different style. You know, the football is evolving. The rules have made the game change greatly. So as a coach, you have to keep wanting to evolve. So for me, it's to keep evolving, keep young with it, keep improving. But really, I think deep down, if you don't have the driven desire to do it, I think then you don't. And I want to win more trophies. I want to try and be successful. And I still feel I've got a lot to prove.
And you know, final question here. What's your, you know, obviously your short-term immediate goal for West Ham is to get them to a good place. What's your goals at West Ham? You know, do you want to get them established and up the league and, you know, build your culture there as we speak? Yeah,
I do very much. We were there a year and a half ago and we didn't keep the job, and I felt as if we should have done. We've done a good enough job. So we're starting a little bit further back. So obviously the number one job is to make sure that we don't get relegated this season. You know, we're just outside of relegation at the moment. We took over when we were in the bottom three. So we're outside it at the moment, depending on whether football starts. And in truth, all we want is people to be safe and healthy, really, you know. So if it doesn't start, it wouldn't be the biggest thing because of the situation we're in. But I've got an idea of how I want it to go. I think West Ham can do something very, very similar to what I done at Everton years ago. I think we can build it, given the opportunity to. It's got massive potential. It's a really, really big club in London, and can certainly compete with many. But just as I said, sometimes the one thing you'd like to get is time, which you don't always get. So I have to try and earn the time, and you normally have to do that by getting results. So I have to try and get results.
One more question, sorry, is you and I talked just before we came on air there about the American player, you know, and I distinctly remember having a conversation with you probably back in the early 2000s when you had just signed Brian McBride, I believe. And you know, a large number of our audience are based in the US, and give us an insight to your experience of the American player. And the story you told me, I remember it distinctly. You know, Brian McBride, he had came over on loan. He'd arrived on a Tuesday morning at Manchester, landed at 6 o'clock. Tuesday was typically your hard running day, and you know, it was raining that day, and he came in and, you know, he kind of set the tone from day one. He was 30 yards ahead of everybody else and just came in and won instant respect. And you know, I think in you and I's conversation, that gave me a good insight to who Brian McBride was, but also you've had others who've just been a fantastic success for you. Yeah,
Brian McBride was sensational as a player, as a man, in what he's done. You know, he was just everything correct about him. And, you know, I was really fortunate to have him a couple of times. I made a couple of mistakes not taking him at different times, but I have to say, he was such a great lad and such a good player, fantastic in the air. His effort, his work rate was unbelievable. But you're right, I've had Brian McBride, I've had Landon Donovan, and I've had Tim Howard. I think I'm really fortunate. I think I've had the three best American players. Now, maybe some of your people will tell me there's better, but I believe I've had the three of the best American players. And I have to say that Landon Donovan was brilliant as well. We brought him on loan from LA, and we brought him over in 2 winters, and he was so good for us and gave us something else, and worked really, really hard for the team. And I was nearly going to say surprises a little bit, but I really enjoyed working with him. And then, obviously, the one who I've had the longest out of them all and signed was Tim Howard, who, for me, is just sensational. It was not only a brilliant goalkeeper, great man, great professional, great teammate, you name it. And no, I'd argue that Tim Howard's been as good a footballer in America as what there is. And you know, wouldn't surprise me to see him president next in the. He's that popular.
I need to finish on that note, David, because that could be a good nomination right there.
There you go. But no, I'm really pleased to have those American players. They were sensational for me, and I think they've got traits. The American players, they should keep them. They should work at them because it does give them something special, and they're all very good.
Oh, brilliant. Fantastic. Well, David, I just can't thank you enough. This has been a huge pleasure. This is roll back the years, 37 years since you gave me that roasting that night in Sheffield at half time. But just a pleasure, and it's been brilliant watching your journey, and thanks so much for taking some time. I know you're busy right now, ready to get back to training. So it's so unbelievably great day, and thanks so much, and give my best to all your family, and give my best to your dad.
Great. Thanks very much, all. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, speak to you later. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.